"Step away from the bucket, Arthur," Brenda said, her voice sounding like a rusted gate scraping across concrete as she stepped onto my driveway, her fingers already twitching over the screen of her iPad. "Good morning to you too, Brenda," I said, not even turning around from the front door as I carefully dipped my brush back into the can. "Beautiful Florida sunshine we're having, isn't it? Really makes the local flora pop. I am not here to discuss the weather, and you know exactly why I'm standing here," she said, her heels clicking aggressively against my concrete pavers as she closed the distance between us. "What is that? What is that substance on your door?" "It's paint, Brenda. Specifically, it's a premium exterior semi-gloss. The shade is called Seafoam Rebellion. I think it adds a really nice, vibrant energy to the entryway, don't you think? It really captures the coastal essence of Coral Gables. It captures a violation of municipal code and a direct assault on the visual harmony of this community," she snapped, her iPad making a sharp click noise as she snapped a photo of my face, which I'm pretty sure is a violation of my personal space. But whatever. I just smiled and waved at the lens. The Coral Gables Collective Aesthetic Guidelines clearly state that all primary residential entryways visible from the public right-of-way must conform to the approved historical palette. That palette consists of sandstone, desert silk, and Coral Gables beige. This abomination is green." "It's seafoam," I corrected her, wiping a tiny speck of stray pigment off the brass deadbolt with my thumb. "And honestly, I mean, beige is just so profoundly depressing. It feels like living inside a cardboard box. I wanted something that reflects a little bit of life, you know? A little bit of joy." "Joy is not an approved color scheme in this subdivision, Arthur," she said, her thumbs flying across her screen with the speed and precision of a caffeinated teenager. "You didn't submit a Form 104-B to the Architectural Review Committee. You didn't wait the mandatory 45 days for a neighborhood feedback window. And you certainly didn't pay the $75 color variance assessment fee. Well, I guess I skipped a few steps, but I figured since it's my house, bought with my money, on land that I pay property taxes for, I could choose what color my own front door is. Call me old-fashioned, I guess." "You can call yourself a non-compliant resident who is currently accumulating a recurring daily fine," she countered, a smug, deeply punchable smile spreading across her face as she looked up from her screen. "The automated citation has already been logged into the City Code enforcement portal. Because you are actively painting a non-conforming hue without a prior permit, you are being hit with an immediate $500 emergency citation for unauthorized structural modification, and an additional $500 for every single calendar day that the structure remains in a non-compliant state." $500 a day? I laughed, turning around fully now and leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Brenda, come on. Literally nobody is being harmed by a seafoam door. The delivery drivers can find my house faster now. It's a public safety feature, if you really think about it." "The only thing I am thinking about is the property values of the Henderson family across the street, who have to look at this visual pollution every time they pull out of their driveway," she said, puffing out her chest and tucking the iPad under her arm like a weapon. "The code is the code, Arthur. You have exactly 24 hours to strip that pigment, apply a coat of approved primer, and restore the door to Coral Gables beige, or the daily compounding fines will begin hitting your account automatically at midnight tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her posture so rigid she looked like she had a broomstick shoved up her spine. I watched her go, then looked down at my half-painted door, and then looked down at my phone, which was already buzzing with an automated email notification from the Coral Gables Code Enforcement Compliance Office. I opened the email, and there it was in black and white. a digital copy of the laminated pink slip they usually stick on your window, detailing Ordinance 4. Unauthorized application of pigment, or altering the chromatic presentation of a permanent residential structure without explicit authorization from the Municipal Aesthetic Board. Altering the chromatic presentation of a permanent residential structure, I muttered to myself, reading the exact phrasing over and over again. I leaned against my porch railing, staring at the wet seafoam paint, a slow, beautiful grin starting to spread across my face. Brenda thought she had just trapped me in a legal corner. She thought I was going to run down to the hardware store, buy a gallon of soul-crushing beige paint, and spend my weekend undoing my hard work just to appease her little clipboard kingdom. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. She didn't realize that I don't just accept a fine. I dissect it down to the individual syllables. I walked inside, grabbed a cold soda from the fridge, sat down at my laptop, and pulled up the full, unedited text of the Coral Gables Municipal Zoning Bylaws and the local homeowner association charter. It was time to find the cracks in her pristine, beige armor. If they wanted to play a game of absolute literalism regarding what constitutes a painted house, I was more than happy to show them exactly how messy that game could get. The problem with people like Brenda is that they rely entirely on the assumption that normal, rational human beings will get intimidated by a big number on a legal notice and just fold immediately. They count on the fear of the system to do the heavy lifting for them. But when you strip away the scary language and look at the actual mechanics of the law, a lot of these hyper-strict local ordinances are built on incredibly flimsy, poorly drafted definitions. I spent the next 3 hours scrolling through thousands of pages of municipal code, cross-referencing definitions, looking up past state court rulings on property rights, and checking the exact legal boundaries of my own front lawn. By the time the sun started to set, throwing a warm orange glow across my beautiful, defiant seafoam door, I had found exactly what I was looking for. The ordinance specifically prohibited the application of pigment to a permanent residential structure. The key words there, the absolute legal anchors of the entire text, were application of pigment and permanent residential structure. According to the definitions section at the very back of the city charter, a permanent residential structure was explicitly defined as any fixed, immobile architectural element attached to the foundation of the property, including walls, roofs, doors, shutters, and porches. The code said absolutely nothing about temporary mobile objects. It said absolutely nothing about human beings. It had zero restrictions on what colors people could wear while standing on private property, and it possessed absolutely no authority to dictate what kinds of temporary, handheld items a property owner's guests could hold while enjoying a peaceful afternoon on a private lawn. I leaned back in my chair, spinning my pen between my fingers, a wave of pure, petty joy washing over me. Brenda wanted a beige neighborhood because she couldn't stand the sight of an unauthorized color disrupting her view. She wanted the seafoam gone. Well, I wasn't going to paint over it, and I wasn't going to pay her stupid fine either. Instead, I was going to make sure that every single time she looked out her front window, she was treated to a visual experience so blindingly colorful, so aggressively loud, and so completely unpunishable that it would make her blood boil. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for a local contracting company I'd used a couple of years ago for some drywall work. The guy who ran it, Hector, was a straight-shooting, cynical Miami native who had spent the last 30 years dealing with corrupt city inspectors, insane zoning boards, and aggressive HOAs all over South Florida. If anyone understood the absolute absurdity of local bureaucracy, it was him. "Hector's Construction and Remodeling," his voice boomed through the speaker, accompanied by the background noise of a buzzing saw and someone shouting in Spanish. "This is Hector." "Hector, hey man, it's Arthur. You did the kitchen drywall over on Valencia Avenue a while back?" "Arthur! The guy with the immaculate wiring and the weirdly specific questions about code clearances." Hector laughed, the background noise dimming slightly as he walked away from the work area. "Yeah, remember you, man. What did you do this time? Did you build a deck that's 3 inches too close to the property line?" "Worse," I said, putting the call on speaker and leaning over my laptop. "I painted my front door Seafoam Rebellion." There was a dead silence on the line for about 3 full seconds. Then, Hector let out a loud, wheezing laugh that sounded like a car engine trying to start in the middle of winter. "Oh man, you painted a door in the Gables without a permit? Are you insane? The beige police are probably surrounding your house right now with SWAT gear." "Brenda already came by," I admitted, smiling. "She hit me with a $500 emergency citation and a $500 a day recurring fine until it's restored to approved beige. I wanted to get your professional opinion on what it would take to legally resolve this the boring way." "The boring way?" Hector sighed, the humor leaving his voice, replaced by the tired exhaustion of a man who has fought too many City Hall battles. "To do it by their book? You gotta hire a licensed bonded painter to strip the seafoam down to the bare wood, because if there's even a microscopic flake of green left under the beige, Brenda's gonna find it with a magnifying glass. Then you gotta submit the Form 104-B, pay the $75 fee, wait a month and a half for the board to vote on whether you're allowed to have a beige door again, and pray they don't deny it just because you pissed them off. Honestly, between materials, labor, and the rush fee to get them off your back before the fines compound into thousands, I'd have to charge you at least $800. And that's the friend discount, Arthur." $800 to paint a door beige," I said, shaking my head. "That's literally criminal." "It's a racket, man. The whole city is a racket for the paint companies and the HOA boards. I tell people all the time, you don't own your house in the Gables. You just lease it from the old ladies who have nothing better to do than measure your grass. Honestly, man, you'd be better off just standing in front of the door with your body every morning so Brenda can't see it when she does her little golf cart patrols." I froze, Hector's words echoing in my mind. Standing in front of the door so she can't see it. "Hector," I said slowly, my eyes widening as the full scale of the plan crystallized in my brain. "Say that again." "What? Standing in front of the door? I was joking, Arthur. You can't stand there 24 hours a day. You gotta sleep. You gotta buy groceries." No, you don't understand," I said, my voice rising with excitement as I pulled up a satellite map of my property on the laptop screen. "The ordinance specifically says, application of pigment to a permanent residential structure. If I don't apply any paint to the structure, I haven't broken the law. And if the color isn't actually on the house, but rather in front of the house." "Arthur, what the hell are you talking about?" Hector asked, sounding genuinely concerned for my mental health. "Are you having a stroke?" "Hector, how wide is my front yard? From the left property line to the right property line, right along the sidewalk edge?" "I don't know, man. 50, 60 feet? Why?" "And if a standard adult human male stands shoulder to shoulder with another human being, how much horizontal space do they occupy? Like 2 feet? Yeah, maybe 2 feet if they're cozy." "Arthur, seriously, what are you planning? If you're gonna start a protest on your lawn, the city's gonna shut you down for an unpermitted public gathering. They have laws for that too, you know." "It's not a protest, Hector. It's an art installation. It's a peaceful, private assembly of individuals exercising their constitutional rights on private property. And more importantly, it's a human wall of solid, unadulterated color." "You're crazy," Hector said, but I could hear the tiny spark of amusement returning to his voice. "You're completely out of your mind. What are you gonna do, hire a bunch of guys to stand there?" "Exactly 50 of them," I said, tapping my fingers on the desk. "I'm going to build a human mosaic right across my front lawn. When Brenda drives past my house tomorrow morning to check if I painted the door back to beige, she isn't going to see a seafoam door. In fact, she isn't going to see my house at all. She's just going to see a massive, high-definition 50-pixel middle, finger-made entirely out of colored cardboard, held by 50 fully paid, completely legal private citizens. Man, Hector chuckled, letting out a low whistle. I gotta admit, I hate Brenda as much as the next guy. She fined me $300 last year because my truck leaked a drop of oil on the street while I was unloading materials. If you actually pull this off, I want front row seats. But where the hell are you gonna find 50 people who are willing to stand on a lawn holding colored signs in the middle of the Florida heat? Leave that to me, I said, a grin splitting my face. This is a sovereign ruling production. The internet loves a good loophole, and college kids love free pizza. The moment I hung up with Hector, I went to work. The clock was ticking. I had less than 24 hours before the midnight deadline, which meant I needed to source 50 humans, 50 massive pieces of heavy-duty cardboard, and a whole lot of neon spray paint before sunrise. I opened up Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and the local University of Miami student job boards. I created a post with the most straightforward, slightly unhinged headline I could think of. Urgent. 50 people needed for temporary human art installation. No experience required. Must be able to stand still on a private lawn for 8 hours while holding a 3-by-3-foot piece of painted cardboard. $20 an hour, cash at the end of the day. Free lunch, free energy drinks, unlimited premium pizza provided. Starts tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. Help me annoy an HOA president. Within 20 minutes, my inbox exploded. It turns out that offering $20 an hour plus free food to college students and freelancers in South Florida is the digital equivalent of dropping a bleeding steak into a shark tank. My phone was vibrating so hard it was practically vibrating off the edge of the desk. "Hey, is this still available? I can bring 3 friends," one text read. "I hate HOAs. I will literally do this for free as long as there is pepperoni pizza," read another from a guy named Kevin. "Can I wear a costume? I have a full-body mime suit," asked a third applicant. I immediately messaged the mime back and told him he was hired, on the condition that he stayed completely in character the entire time. A silent, judging mime holding a bright neon pink sign seemed like exactly the kind of psychological warfare this project needed. While the RSVPs were rolling in, I threw on my jacket, hopped into my truck, and drove straight to the nearest home improvement warehouse before they closed for the night. I walked into the contractor loading bay like a man on a mission. I grabbed 2 giant flatbed carts and started loading them up with massive sheets of thick, industrial corrugated cardboard, the heavy-duty stuff they use for appliance shipping boxes. I needed 50 perfect 3-by-3-foot squares. Next, I marched over to the paint aisle. I completely bypassed the historical Coral Gables palette section with its depressing rows of beige, tan, and muted cream. Instead, I went straight to the industrial marking and neon section. I grabbed every single can of high-visibility, ultra-reflective fluorescent spray paint they had on the shelves. Fluorescent green, blinding hot pink, electric blue, and a safety orange so bright it practically burned your retinas just looking at the cap. If Brenda thought my seafoam door was a visual assault, these colors were going to be a full-scale declaration of war. "Big project?" the cashier asked, squinting at the mountain of cardboard and the literal crates of neon spray paint I was unloading onto the counter. "Just doing some minor property line adjustments," I told him, flashing a bright smile as I swiped my card, "making sure the neighbors can see where my rights begin and their opinions end." By the time I got back to the house, it was nearly 11 p.m. My garage looked like a frantic, subterranean sign factory. I laid out the cardboard sheets across the concrete floor in a massive, organized grid, measuring them out and cutting them down to perfect squares with a box cutter. Then, using a basic pixel art generator I found online, I mapped out the design. With 50 people standing side by side in 2 rows of 25, I had a grid of 25 pixels wide by 2 pixels high. It wasn't enough resolution to create a complex masterpiece, but it was more than enough to create an unmistakable, massive geometric pattern. I decided on an alternating pattern of blinding, fluorescent hot pink and toxic neon green. From the street, it would look like a giant, vibrating checkerboard wall of pure, unadulterated aesthetic non-compliance. I shook the spray paint cans, the metallic mixing balls rattling loudly in the quiet garage, and went to work. By 3 a.m., the garage floor was completely covered in 50 drying, neon-bright placards, and the air smelled heavily of aerosol and sweet victory. My hands were stained green and pink, my back was aching from bending over the cardboard, but as I looked down at the finished product, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was beautiful. It was majestic. It was completely, undeniably ridiculous. I caught about 3 hours of restless sleep before my alarm went off at 6 a.m. I threw on a comfortable shirt, brewed a massive pot of coffee, and walked out onto my front porch. The morning air was warm and humid, typical for a South Florida summer, and the street was completely quiet. Brenda's house across the way was still dark, her golf cart parked neatly in her driveway, like a predator waiting for its prey. She probably thought she was going to wake up, check her little portal, and see that I had folded under the pressure. At exactly 6:45 a.m., the first Uber pulled up to the curb. Then another. Then a beat-up sedan packed with 4 college kids playing loud music. Within 15 minutes, my quiet, pristine, beige-mandated suburban cul-de-sac was absolutely swarming with people. There were college students in gym shorts, a couple of local artists with tattoos, a retired postal worker named Gary, who explicitly told me he joined because his own HOA fined him for having a bird feeder, and true to his word, the mime. He arrived in full white face paint, a striped shirt, and black suspenders, giving me a silent, dramatic thumbs up as he walked onto the grass. "All right, everyone, gather round," I called out, standing on my porch steps and clapping my hands together to get their attention. The crowd of 50 shuffled onto my lawn, murmuring happily as they eyed the massive coolers of energy drinks and iced coffee I had set out for them. "First of all, thank you all for showing up," I said, my voice carrying over the manicured lawns. "Today, you aren't just earning $20 an hour. Today, you are the front line of constitutional freedom against the tyrannical forces of suburban overreach. Behind me is my front door. It is painted Seafoam Rebellion. The HOA president, who lives right over there, thinks she can fine me $500 a day because she doesn't like the color. But we are about to teach her a very important lesson about the English language." The college kids cheered, and Gary the postal worker let out a loud, "Hell yeah!" "Here's the deal," I continued, pointing toward the garage. "Inside, there are 50 numbered placards. When I call your name, you're going to grab your assigned card. We are going to form 2 neat, perfectly straight lines right along the edge of my property, just inside the sidewalk line. Row A will stand in the front, holding their cards at waist level. Row B will stand directly behind them, holding their cards at chest level. Once you are in position, your only job is to stand there, hold the card steady, and look beautiful. You can talk, you can listen to music with headphones, you can scroll on your phones, but you cannot drop the cards, and you cannot step onto the public sidewalk. We stay on my private property, understood? What if we need to use the bathroom? One of the college girls asked, raising her hand. Excellent question. We have a rotating shift system. I've hired 3 extra people to act as floaters. If you need a break, raise your hand. A floater will take your card and hold your spot, and you can use the restroom inside or grab a slice of pizza. Any other questions? The mime raised his hand, pointed to his mouth, made a talking motion, and then violently shook his head. Correct, I smiled. No talking for you. Just pure, unadulterated artistic expression. We spent the next 20 minutes organizing the grid. It was like trying to direct a low-budget halftime show. I stood out by the curb with a megaphone, guiding them into position until the human wall was perfectly aligned. Move 2 steps to the left, number 14. Number 28, raise your card about 3 inches. Perfect. Hold it right there. When the final card was lifted into place, the transformation was staggering. My front yard had completely vanished. From the street, you couldn't see my grass, you couldn't see my porch, and you absolutely couldn't see my seafoam front door. All you could see was a massive, 50-foot-wide solid wall of alternating fluorescent pink and neon green squares. It was so bright it looked like a glitch in reality. A vibrant, flashing digital artifact dropped right into the middle of a sleepy, beige neighborhood. At exactly 7:30 a.m., right on schedule, the front door of Brenda's house swung open. She stepped out onto her porch, coffee mug in one hand, her trusted clipboard in the other. She took 3 steps forward, adjusting her reading glasses, ready to scan my house for compliance. She looked up, froze mid-stride, and literally dropped her coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against her pavers, splashing dark liquid all over her immaculate white sneakers, but she didn't even notice. Her jaw was hanging open so low I thought it might detach from her face. She stared at the human neon wall for a solid 10 seconds, her eyes blinking rapidly, as if she was trying to clear an optical illusion from her vision. Then, her face began to turn a shade of deep, furious crimson that definitely wasn't on the approved Coral Gables historical palette. She marched down her driveway, her golf cart completely forgotten, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. She stormed across the asphalt street, her heels pounding against the pavement, until she was standing a mere 2 inches away from the public sidewalk edge, right in front of my human wall. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that probably could have shattered glass. She looked at row A, then at row B, her eyes darting across the bright pink and green cardboard. "Arthur! Arthur, get out here right now!" I stepped out from behind the human wall, walking down the small gap I had left on the side of the porch, a wide, cheerful smile on my face. "Good morning, Brenda. Lovely day for an art exhibition, isn't it? Get these people off this lawn immediately," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Gary, the postal worker, who just grinned and gave her a casual wink. "This is a violation. This is an unauthorized, unpermitted, illegal public assembly. You are running an illegal business operation in a residential zone. Look at this. This visual terrorism." "Whoa, Brenda, calm down. Let's keep the language civil," I said, leaning casually against my mailbox post. "First of all, nobody here is protesting anything. This isn't a public assembly. These are my personal guests. I invited them over to my private property to participate in a live, temporary architectural art installation. There's no law against having friends over on a Tuesday morning. They are holding signs. That makes it a demonstration." They aren't holding signs with messages, Brenda. Look closer. There are no words. There are no slogans. It's just solid blocks of color. It's a geometric exploration of space and chromatic intensity. It's high art. Honestly, I mean, you should appreciate it. You're always talking about the visual presentation of the neighborhood. Well, this is a presentation. "You are doing this to block the door!" she screamed, her eyes bulging. "I know exactly what you're doing, Arthur. You think you're clever? You think you can hide that illegal green paint behind a human shield? I can't see the structure. If I can't see the structure, I can't verify compliance." Well, if you can't see the structure, then you also can't prove that it's non-compliant, can you? I pointed out, my smile widening. The ordinance states that a fine is levied if the permanent residential structure exhibits an unauthorized pigment. But as you can clearly see, the only pigments on display right now are attached to mobile, temporary cardboard sheets held by private citizens. No paint has been applied to the house today. The house is completely untouched. "I am calling the police," she hissed, her fingers trembling as she pulled her phone out of her pocket. "I am calling the city manager. I am calling code enforcement. And I am having every single one of you arrested for disturbing the peace and creating a public nuisance." "Feel free," I said, waving my hand toward the street. "In fact, tell them to hurry. The pizza delivery guy is going to be here in a couple of hours, and I want to make sure there's enough parking for everyone." Brenda turned around, pacing back and forth on the asphalt as she yelled into her phone, gesturing wildly toward my yard like a frantic traffic controller. Behind her back, the mime silently mimicked her exact movements, pacing back and forth with an invisible phone, his face contorted into a hilarious parody of suburban rage. The college kids in the front row had to bite their lips to keep from laughing out loud. Within 15 minutes, the distant sound of a siren echoed through the neighborhood. A white and blue Coral Gables police cruiser came rolling round the corner, its emergency lights flashing lazily in the bright morning sun. It pulled up right behind Brenda's house, and 2 officers stepped out. The first was Officer Jenkins, a tall, imposing man with a thick mustache who looked like he had seen everything South Florida had to offer and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. The second was Officer Miller, a younger guy who was already squinting at the neon wall with an expression of pure, unadulterated confusion. All right, what's going on here?" Officer Jenkins asked, walking up to the curb, his hands resting casually on his utility belt. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Brenda cried, rushing over to them like they were an arriving rescue squad. "This resident is operating an illegal, unpermitted public demonstration. He has hired an angry mob to block the public view of his property to evade a municipal code citation. Look at this chaos. They are obstructing the neighborhood." Officer Jenkins looked at Brenda, then looked past her at the 50 people standing perfectly still, holding bright pink and green cards. He blinked once, twice, and then looked down at his clipboard. "Ma'am, they're standing on the grass," Jenkins noted, his voice flat and calm. "Are any of them blocking the sidewalk?" "Well, no, but are any of them blocking the street?" "No, but look at the colors. They are blinding. They are causing a public nuisance." Jenkins sighed, a deep, weary sound, and walked past her toward where I was standing. Officer Miller followed close behind, his eyes darting to the mime, who immediately went into a rigid robotic statue pose, holding his neon pink card perfectly still. Miller cleared his throat, trying desperately to hide a grin. "Morning, sir," Officer Jenkins said to me, nodding his head. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am, officer," I said, extending my hand. "Arthur Pendleton. Welcome to my private property." "Mr. Pendleton, we got a call about a public disturbance and an illegal protest. Care to tell me what's happening on your lawn?" "Honestly, officer, I'm just hosting a private gathering," I said, using my best, most reasonable, civic-minded voice. "I'm an art enthusiast, and today we are staging a temporary, stationary human mosaic. Every person you see here is an invited guest on my private property. They aren't shouting, they aren't protesting, they aren't blocking any public right-of-way, and they certainly aren't breaking any laws. We're just enjoying a beautiful Florida morning and exercising our First Amendment rights to peaceful assembly and temporary creative expression." "He's lying," Brenda shouted, elbowing her way back to the front. "He's doing this because I fined him for painting his door green. He's using them as a barrier so code enforcement can't take a compliance photograph." Officer Jenkins turned his gaze back to Brenda, his brow furrowing. "Ma'am, let me get this straight. You called the police department, emergency services, because you can't take a picture of a door? It's a code violation. He's actively defying a city ordinance." "Officer," I interrupted smoothly, pulling a neatly printed packet of papers out of my back pocket and handing it to Jenkins. "I actually have a copy of the specific municipal ordinance right here, along with the official definition index from the city charter. As you can see, Ordinance 4B strictly governs the application of pigment to a permanent residential structure. It specifically defines a permanent structure as something fixed to the foundation. It contains absolutely zero language regulating the clothes my guests wear, the temporary items they hold, or the colors they display while standing on my lawn. Since no paint has been applied to any fixed structure today, there is literally no active violation taking place. And under Florida state law, I have full authority to permit guests to stand on my property for as long as I see fit, provided they aren't violating noise or safety regulations." Jenkins took the papers, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through them. He spent a good 2 minutes reading the highlighted sections, his mustache twitching slightly. He looked up from the page, glanced at the human wall of blinding neon pink and green, and then looked at Brenda. "Ma'am," Jenkins said, handing the papers back to me. "He's right." "What?" Brenda gasped, clutching her clipboard so hard the plastic cracked. "What do you mean he's right? Look at that! That is an eyesore!" "Being an eyesore isn't a misdemeanor, ma'am," Jenkins said, his tone dripping with the absolute exhaustion of a cop who has better things to do than settle neighborhood paint feuds. "The law is written very specifically. They aren't touching the house. They aren't applying paint. They are just standing on private property holding cardboard. If I arrest someone for holding a piece of cardboard on a private lawn, the city is going to get sued for a civil rights violation before the paperwork even hits my desk. There is no crime being committed here. This is a civil matter between you, the HOA, and the resident." "But the fines," Brenda pleaded, her voice cracking. "The fines are supposed to start at midnight. How am I supposed to enforce the daily penalty if I can't verify if the door is painted beige?" "I guess you're just going to have to wait until they go home, ma'am," Officer Miller chimed in, unable to contain his amusement any longer. "But as long as they're standing right there, our hands are tied. Have a good day, folks." The two officers turned around, walked back to their cruiser, and drove away, leaving Brenda standing on the edge of the sidewalk, completely alone, her face practically radiating fury. "This isn't over, Arthur," she screamed, her voice shaking as she backed away toward her house. "The city zoning board is meeting tonight for an emergency hearing. I will have a special injunction filed against you by sunset. You will pay for this. Every single penny." "See you at the meeting, Brenda," I shouted back, waving cheerfully. "Don't forget to try the pizza. The delivery guy should be here any minute." The moment she slammed her front door shut, the entire human wall erupted into cheers and laughter. The college kids started high-fiving each other. Gary, the postal worker, did a little jig on the grass, and the mime did a dramatic, slow-motion victory collapse onto the lawn, perfectly maintaining his silent performance. By noon, the atmosphere on my front yard felt like a full-blown block party. The pizza delivery truck arrived, and the driver's jaw dropped when he saw a 50-foot wall of neon green and pink cardboard waiting for him. I paid him, gave him a massive tip, and we set up a folding table right behind the human wall, passing slices of fresh, steaming pepperoni and cheese pizza through the gaps between the placards. Hector drove by around 2 p.m. in his construction truck. He slowed down to a crawl, rolled down his window, and just stared at the spectacle, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Arthur, you beautiful, magnificent lunatic," he yelled out over the engine. "You actually did it! Look at that wall! Brenda's probably inside chewing on her carpet right now." "Come grab a slice, Hector," I shouted back. "Can't, man, got a job down in Kendall, but keep fighting the good fight. I'm watching this play out all the way." He honked his horn 3 times and sped off, laughing loud enough to be heard over the traffic. As the afternoon rolled on, the sun beat down on the pavement, but my crew stayed strong. The floaters worked seamlessly, swapping in and out so people could rest in the shade of my porch, drink ice-cold water, and scroll through social media. Local residents driving down the street slowed down to take photos and videos. A few neighbors who also secretly hated Brenda's tyrannical rule even walked over to cheer us on, bringing extra coolers of ice and homemade cookies. "This is the best thing that's ever happened to this street," an elderly woman named Martha told me, leaning over the fence while holding a plate of brownies. "Brenda made me take down my plastic pink flamingos last month because they weren't historically accurate. Watching her lose her mind over a human wall of neon pink is pure poetry, Arthur. Pure poetry." But I knew the real battle wasn't won yet. Brenda's threat about the emergency city zoning board meeting wasn't hollow. In hyper-wealthy, ultra-regulated enclaves like Coral Gables, the local boards hold an immense amount of arbitrary power, and they are used to operating like tiny, unchecked dictatorships. If I wanted to seal this victory permanently, I couldn't just mock them on my lawn. I had to go into their house, use their own rulebook, and execute a flawless legal smackdown right in front of the entire board. The Emergency Municipal Zoning and Aesthetic Review meeting was held at 7 p.m. in the Community Town Hall room. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Plush carpet, polished oak tables, and a row of 5 board members sitting on an elevated dais, looking down at the public like Roman senators deciding the fate of a gladiator. Brenda was already there, sitting at the front table next to a man in a sharp gray suit, who turned out to be the city's chief code enforcement attorney, a stern-faced guy named Henderson. Brenda had her iPad propped up on a stand, ready to display her evidence, her eyes locking onto me the moment I walked through the double doors. I took my seat at the opposing table, wearing a clean button-down shirt, carrying nothing but a single, slim manila folder. I didn't need a mountain of paperwork. I just needed the absolute truth of the text. The emergency session of the Coral Gables Aesthetic Review and Code Enforcement Board is now in order, the board chairman announced, rapping his gavel against a wooden block. We are here to review an expedited citation appeal and injunction request filed by Code Enforcement District 4 regarding the property located at 1422 Valencia Avenue, owned by Mr. Arthur Pendleton. Miss Brenda Vance, you have the floor to present the city's case. Brenda stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. She cleared her throat, her voice echoing through the microphone with an aggressive, trembling energy. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board," she began, clicking a button on her remote to project a massive photo onto the screen behind her. It was a picture of my house from that morning, or rather, a picture of the 50-foot human wall of solid neon pink and green cardboard. As you can see from this photographic evidence taken at 8 a.m. today, the resident at 1422 Valencia Avenue has engaged in a flagrant, malicious, and unprecedented campaign of visual non-compliance. Not only has he painted his primary residential entryway a prohibited, highly disruptive shade of green, but he has actively conspired to block the public right-of-way view by hiring an unpermitted crowd of individuals to form a physical barrier. This is a direct attempt to evade municipal code enforcement. It constitutes an unauthorized commercial event in a residential zone, and it is causing severe emotional distress and property value depreciation to the surrounding community. We are asking the board to authorize an immediate emergency injunction, allowing city workers to enter the property, remove the barrier, strip the non-conforming paint, and levy the full compounding $500 a day fine retroactively from yesterday morning. The board members stared at the screen, their expressions ranging from shock to absolute bewilderment. One elderly board member put on his glasses, leaning forward to squint at the neon checkerboard pattern. "Mr. Pendleton," the chairman said, turning his cold gaze down toward me. "This board takes the visual harmony of Coral Gables very seriously. The evidence presented by Miss Vance shows an extraordinary level of disruption. What do you have to say for yourself?" I stood up calmly, adjusting my shirt, and stepped up to the microphone podium. I didn't look at Brenda. I kept my eyes fixed directly on the board members. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of the anger that Brenda was radiating. "I'd like to address the city's claims one by one, using the exact language of the municipal code that this very board is sworn to uphold. Miss Vance claims that I am in violation of Ordinance 4B for an unauthorized application of pigment to a permanent residential structure. I would like to ask the city's legal counsel a very simple, direct question. Mr. Henderson, under the statutory definitions listed in Chapter 1, Section 4 of the Coral Gables Code of Ordinances, what is the exact legal definition of a permanent residential structure?" The city attorney, Henderson, blinked, caught off guard by being directly addressed. He shifted in his seat, opening a thick leather binder in front of him. Under Section 4, a permanent residential structure is defined as any fixed architectural element physically attached to the property's foundation, including but not limited to load-bearing walls, exterior siding, roofs, and permanent entry fixtures like doors and porches. "Thank you," I said, nodding. "Fixed to the foundation. Now, Mr. Henderson, looking at the photographic evidence provided by Miss Vance, can you point to a single square inch of my load-bearing walls, my siding, my roof, or my permanent door that has a single drop of neon pink or neon green paint applied to it?" Henderson stared at the photo on the screen. He looked at the cardboard squares, then looked down at his binder, his jaw tightening. "Well, no. The structure itself is not visible in this photograph." "Exactly," I said, slamming my hand lightly on the podium for emphasis. "Because the structure itself has not been altered. The permanent residential structure is currently unpainted with regards to any neon color. The pigments on display in that photograph are entirely composed of water-based spray paint applied to temporary, mobile sheets of corrugated cardboard. Is there any ordinance in the Coral Gables Municipal Code that regulates the color of temporary handheld cardboard sheets on private property?" "No," Henderson admitted, his voice dropping an octave as he realized the trap he had just walked into. "There is no such ordinance." "He's twisting the words," Brenda shouted, leaning over her table. "He painted the door underneath. I saw him do it. It's seafoam green. The cardboard is just a trick to hide it." "Miss Vance, please maintain order," the chairman warned, though his eyes were now fixed on me with a sudden, sharp look of intense calculation. "Let's address that claim too," I said, turning back to the board. Miss Vance claims she saw me painting the door, but the law does not operate on what Miss Vance claims to have seen through her binoculars from across the street. The law operates on verifiable evidence. Under the city's own enforcement guidelines, a code citation cannot be legally processed or validated without a verified, time-stamped compliance photograph showing the active violation on the permanent structure. Miss Vance does not possess such a photograph, because every single time she or any code enforcement officer has looked at my property today, they have seen nothing but private citizens exercising their constitutional right to peaceful assembly on a private lawn. "You are running an unpermitted event," Brenda fired back, her face turning purple. "You paid those people. That makes it a commercial operation." Paying individuals to participate in a creative endeavor on private property is not a commercial operation, Brenda. It's an independent art project, I countered smoothly. And under the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, which, last time I checked, still applies even within the boundaries of Coral Gables, the government cannot restrict the peaceful assembly of individuals on private land based on the colors they choose to hold, nor can it force a private citizen to disclose the financial arrangements of his private gatherings. If this board votes to issue an injunction to remove American citizens from a private lawn because you don't like the color of the cardboard they are holding, you aren't just violating a local code, you are committing a flagrant, actionable violation of federal civil rights law under Section 1983. And I am more than happy to take this channel's resources, hire the best constitutional lawyers in the state of Florida, and tie this city up in federal litigation for the next 10 years. The room went completely, utterly silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit in the ceiling. The city attorney, Henderson, leaned over to the board chairman, whispering furiously into his ear while pointing at a section of his legal binder. The chairman's face paled slightly as he listened, nodding slowly, his eyes cutting over to Brenda with a look of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He realized what I knew from the very beginning. They were completely cornered. Their entire system of petty control relied on residents being too afraid or too broke to fight back. But I had used their own hyper-specific definitions to create a loophole so wide you could drive a truck through it, and I had backed it up with a constitutional shield that their local zoning laws couldn't touch without shattering into a million pieces. The chairman leaned back in his leather chair, clearing his throat loudly as Henderson finished whispering, and sat back down, looking thoroughly defeated. "The board has reviewed the arguments and cross-referenced the statutory language," the chairman announced, his voice sounding incredibly forced, like every word was physically hurting him to say. "While this board finds the aesthetic presentation of the residents' property today to be highly unusual and contrary to the spirit of the community guidelines, the legal counsel advises that the current wording of Ordinance 4B does not extend jurisdiction over temporary, mobile items or human presence on private property. Furthermore, without visual, photographic verification of a non-compliant permanent structure, the city cannot legally validate the recurring fines." Brenda let out a loud, strangled gasp. "Mr. Chairman, you can't be serious. He's beating us. He's beating the system." "Silence, Miss Vance," the chairman snapped, slamming his gavel down with an angry thud. "The board hereby orders the immediate dismissal of the emergency citation and the suspension of all recurring fines against Mr. Arthur Pendleton. However, Mr. Pendleton, we highly advise you to consider the communal harmony of your neighborhood going forward." "I always consider my neighbors, Mr. Chairman," I said, giving a polite, respectful bow of my head as I tucked my single manila folder under my arm. In fact, I'm hosting a barbecue for 53 of my closest friends tomorrow morning, and everyone is invited. Have a wonderful evening. The next morning, the sun rose over Coral Gables, painting the sky in beautiful, unauthorized shades of orange, pink, and gold. I stood on my front porch, leaning against the railing, taking a slow, deep sip from my coffee mug. The human wall was gone. The 50 college kids, Gary the postal worker, and the mime had all been paid their cash, eaten their fill of premium pizza, and gone home, leaving behind an immaculate, perfectly clean lawn. The giant neon placards were neatly stacked in my garage, ready to be deployed again whenever the situation called for it. I looked down at my front door, its Seafoam Rebellion paint shining beautifully in the bright Florida light. It was vibrant. It was alive. It was a glorious, constant reminder that the rules only have as much power as you give them. Across the street, Brenda's front door opened a tiny crack. She peeked out, her clipboard nowhere to be seen, her eyes locking onto my seafoam door. I lifted my coffee mug toward her, flashing a massive, brilliant smile, and gave her a slow, friendly wave. She slammed her door shut so hard the sound echoed all the way down the block. I turned around, looking out past my yard, thinking about everyone out there dealing with their own local Brendas, their own petty bureaucracies, and their own mountains of soul-crushing beige regulations. They want you to think the system is an impenetrable wall, that you have to just bow down, pay the fee, and blend into the background. But they write those rules in a hurry, and they write them assuming you won't take the time to read between the lines. They might write the rules, but they rarely read them. Know your rights, know their loopholes, and never let anyone paint you into a corner.